The day began like any other at Stratford Global Solutions, a towering glass building in downtown Aurora City. I walked in with my usual coffee in hand, briefcase under my arm, feeling invisible yet determined. My colleagues barely noticed me, and even when they did, it was with polite nods and distant smiles. My name is Elena Cruz, and for the past 5 years, I had been the quiet backbone of the corporate operations team, the support staff, as the VP, Richard Hargrove, loved to remind me. That morning, the office buzzed with tension. Rumors had spread about a massive deal, a $5 billion client considering switching firms. The top executives were in a frenzy, strategizing over who would lead the negotiations. Richard strode past my desk with that familiar smirk, whispering loudly enough for the surrounding cubicles to hear, "Don't get too excited, Elena. You're just support staff." His words hit me like a punch to the gut. I smiled politely, nodding, but inside, a storm brewed. Years of being underestimated, dismissed, and overlooked for promotions had led to this moment. And today, something inside me clicked. Today, I wouldn't remain invisible. By noon, the conference room was packed. The client, a high-profile tech conglomerate called Zenith Innovations, had flown in their top executives. The air was thick with anticipation as Richard strutted to the front, exuding confidence. I took my usual seat at the side, unnoticed, quietly reviewing the client dossier. Then it happened. Richard's opening presentation began, and almost immediately he fumbled. A critical slide didn't load. His voice cracked mid-sentence. The client shifted uncomfortably. My heart raced as I realized that I knew the material inside out, every number, every contract clause, every contingency plan. And more importantly, I knew exactly how to turn the tables. I raised my hand. "If I may," I said calmly, stepping forward. All eyes turned to me. Gasps echoed around the room. Richard froze, his smirk disappearing. "Elena, he started, but I didn't wait. I launched into a flawless walkthrough of the proposal, anticipating every question, clarifying every concern, and revealing insights that none of the executives had considered. By the time I finished, the client's CFO, Marcus Lyle, leaned back in his chair, impressed. "That was incredibly thorough," he said. "You've clearly thought of every scenario." Richard's face turned pale. He opened his mouth to interrupt, but the client raised a hand. "No, let her finish. She's clearly the one who understands this deal." A chill ran through the room, and I felt a surge of vindication. For the first time, the invisible Elena Cruz was seen. And Richard's arrogance? It was crumbling in real time. The meeting ended with murmurs of approval and handshakes that carried more respect for me than for Richard. As the client team left, I noticed Richard retreating to his office, his face a mask of fury and disbelief. I could feel the tension behind him like static electricity in the air. Everyone in the room knew he had been humiliated, but no one dared voice it. Back at my desk, I tried to focus on the paperwork, but my mind was racing. I had to be careful. One wrong move, and my victory could be sabotaged. Yet, a tiny spark of excitement burned in my chest. For the first time, I wasn't just a shadow in the office, I was a force to be reckoned with. By mid-afternoon, an email popped up in my inbox from Zenith Innovations CEO, Anya Patel. The subject line read, "Follow-up, let's talk strategy." My fingers trembled slightly as I opened it. They wanted me to lead the negotiation calls. The irony was delicious. The very people Richard had tried to impress were putting me in the driver's seat. Richard stormed into my workspace a few minutes later. "Elena, what do you think you're doing?" he demanded. His voice was low, dangerous, but I remained calm. I looked up, meeting his eyes directly, letting him feel the weight of years of underestimation. "I'm doing what you should have done hours ago," I said softly. "Preparing for the client's questions, making sure we don't lose the deal." His jaw clenched. "This isn't your decision. Your support staff," I interrupted gently, echoing his own words from the morning. His face twitched. I could see that old arrogance cracking, revealing insecurity and fear. Over the next few days, I took control of the negotiations. Every call, every presentation, every subtle strategic move was executed flawlessly. And with each success, Richard's authority eroded further. Whispers traveled through the office. "Elena is leading the Zenith account now." It was a slow, delicious unraveling of his empire of ego. Then came the turning point. Zenith Innovations flew in for the final negotiation session, this time in a private conference suite in Aurora Tower, a sleek skyscraper that touched the clouds. Richard was barely present, shadowing me silently, his hands trembling slightly as he shuffled papers. I stepped forward, armed with data, strategy, and a quiet confidence. I outlined every potential risk, every contingency, and presented solutions that preemptively solved problems Richard hadn't even noticed existed. By the time I finished, the client executives were nodding, impressed and relieved. Marcus Lyle leaned forward, eyes sharp, voice firm. "Elena, you clearly understand our vision and our concerns. We want you leading this account moving forward." The words hit Richard like a punch. His face went pale, his fingers tightening around his notes. I could see the realization in his eyes. He had lost. Completely. The $5 billion client, the biggest in the company's history, had chosen me over him. And, just like that, the office dynamics shifted. I wasn't invisible anymore. I wasn't just support staff. I was a rising power, a silent storm that had finally broken free. That evening, as I walked home through the dimly lit streets of Aurora City, I felt a strange mix of exhilaration and caution. Corporate revenge was sweet, but dangerous. One wrong step could bring everything crashing down. Yet, for the first time in years, I felt alive, seen, and unstoppable. The next morning, the office was buzzing with attention I had never witnessed before. Whispers of my performance with Zenith Innovations floated through the halls like smoke, each one carrying the weight of disbelief and awe. Even the senior managers who had ignored me for years were now exchanging furtive glances, clearly recalculating their perceptions. Richard didn't speak to me directly that day. Instead, he lingered near the executive lounge, pretending to review reports while I handled client calls and strategic planning. Every time I glanced his way, I caught the subtle tremor in his hand, the slight flicker of panic behind his eyes. I allowed myself a small, satisfied smile. Revenge wasn't about loud confrontation. It was about letting someone suffocate in the weight of their own hubris. By midday, the real test arrived. Anya Patel, Zenith's CEO, had requested a private lunch with me. It was unusual, but I sensed opportunity. As I entered the exclusive restaurant, I noticed Richard had somehow managed to trail me, feigning casual observation while his posture screamed tension. Anya greeted me warmly. "Elena, the work you've done has exceeded expectations." But there's a more delicate matter we need to discuss. I leaned in slightly, curious but cautious. What's that? She paused, eyes scanning the room as if making sure no one else was listening. We're considering a full strategic partnership, and we want you to spearhead it. You'll have autonomy over all operational decisions regarding Zenith. No interference. Full control. The words were intoxicating. I could feel my pulse quicken, not from ambition, but from the poetic justice of it. Richard, the VP who had called me just support staff, was now irrelevant. Lunch ended with handshakes and congratulations, and I left with a renewed sense of power. But the real climax awaited back at the office. Richard, unaware of the lunch conversation, approached me as if he still had authority. Elena, I need to speak to you about. I held up a hand, stopping him mid-sentence. About what, Richard? How to continue undermining me? Or maybe you want to explain how you lost a $5 billion client while I was handling every detail flawlessly. His face flushed red, and for the first time, he stuttered. The VP, who had once been untouchable, was reduced to a nervous shadow. I had never felt more vindicated. Over the next week, I implemented the strategic partnership plans, coordinated high-level meetings, and presented solutions that anticipated client concerns before they even arose. Each success further cemented my position. I watched quietly as Richard's influence diminished, every confident statement from him now met with polite nods and unspoken doubt. Finally, the board meeting arrived. Richard sat in his usual place at the head of the table, but his presence felt hollow. I presented the Zenith partnership plan with precision, backed by data and real-time analysis. Every point I made was met with nods, questions that I had anticipated, and praise that resonated through the room. When I finished, the board chairman leaned back, eyes sweeping across the room. Elena, your leadership and vision have been instrumental. Effective immediately, you will lead all interactions with Zenith Innovations. Richard will support you in an advisory capacity only. Richard's face drained of color. He opened his mouth, closed it, and stared at me with a mix of disbelief and fury. The humiliation was complete. The man who had once dismissed me as just support staff now had to accept his irrelevance. As I left the boardroom, a mixture of triumph and calm washed over me. Corporate revenge isn't about anger. It's about control, strategy, and patience. And today, I had mastered all three. Walking through the office, colleagues subtly congratulated me. Emails and messages poured in from clients impressed with my leadership. For the first time in years, I felt seen, respected, and powerful. The storm I had quietly built had finally erupted, and Richard was caught in the aftermath. That evening, I paused by the window of my apartment, watching the city lights flicker like distant stars. Revenge, I realized, is most satisfying when it's complete, inevitable, and silent. And mine had been all three. The week after the board meeting, the office atmosphere had shifted dramatically. Even the quietest employees who had once avoided me now walked past with subtle nods, some even daring to offer congratulations. Richard, on the other hand, had grown increasingly isolated, his aura of superiority replaced by a nervous caution that made him almost unrecognizable. I spent that Monday morning reviewing Zenith's latest reports when my phone buzzed. An unknown number. I hesitated but answered. Hello. Elena, it's Anya. The voice on the other side was calm but urgent. We've encountered a situation that requires your immediate attention. Can you come to our private conference room? Curiosity and caution mingled in my mind as I made my way up. As I entered, I saw the CEO along with two senior executives. They gestured for me to sit. "We've just received intelligence," Anya said, leaning forward, "that a rival firm may attempt a hostile takeover if Zenith's partnership details leak." They specifically mentioned a name, Richard Spencer. I paused, letting the information sink in. My former tormentor had unwittingly put himself at risk. A part of me almost smiled at the irony. He had been reckless, blinded by ego, and now his missteps could cost him everything. "Here's what we need to do," Anya continued. "You're going to lead a covert response strategy. Your decisions will determine whether we protect our client and prevent a potential disaster." That afternoon, I orchestrated a series of tactical moves, contacting internal teams, scheduling client calls, and preparing contingency plans. Each action was precise, calculated, and designed not only to safeguard Zenith, but to expose any weaknesses in the rival firm's plan. Richard, meanwhile, tried to insert himself into the process. He approached me, attempting to assert authority. "Elena, perhaps I should." I cut him off with a steady gaze. "Richard, your role now is advisory. If you have insights, share them. Otherwise, step aside." His frustration was palpable. The arrogance that had once defined him now only highlighted his impotence. Every suggestion he made was carefully countered by my strategy, leaving him flustered and silent. By the end of the week, the threat had been neutralized. Zenith Innovations was secure, their trust in me absolute. I had not only saved the client, but had turned a potential disaster into a demonstration of my competence and leadership. That Friday evening, as the office emptied, I walked past Richard's desk. He looked up, eyes filled with a mixture of envy and reluctant admiration. I didn't gloat. I simply nodded and walked away, the weight of victory quiet but undeniable. In the following days, news of the successful Zenith partnership spread. Senior management praised my foresight, clients applauded my leadership, and Richard's credibility was irreversibly diminished. The lesson was clear: patience, strategy, and resilience always triumph over arrogance and dismissiveness. Walking out of the office that Friday night, I felt an unfamiliar sense of calm. Revenge had been served, but it was not loud or explosive. It was methodical, inevitable, and complete. And in that silence, I found satisfaction far deeper than any confrontation could ever provide. You know what hurts more than being insulted? Being underestimated. They called me just support staff. They thought silence meant weakness. They thought loyalty meant obedience. But here's the truth no corporate handbook will ever tell you. The most dangerous person in the room is the one who knows the system and stays quiet long enough to let others destroy themselves. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't beg for respect. I simply stepped aside and let the truth walk out with me. Now I want to ask you something. Have you ever been humiliated at work? Ever been called just admin, just support, easily replaceable? If you have, tell your story in the comments. Someone reading it tonight might realize they're not weak. They're just waiting for the right moment. If this story hit close to home, press like. It helps these stories reach the people who need them. And subscribe. Because here we don't tell fairy tales. We tell real corporate revenge stories. Silence is not surrender. Sometimes it's strategy.